the land of direct-to-DVD/video animated films. Sometimes there are some things in there that can feel like fever dreams, or make one wonder, did I ever actually watch that? Just because of how they were released, sometimes they exist in this realm where certain people have a lot of knowledge of them and others not so much. It also depends how much they get picked up in terms of the digital landscape. Some are talked about more than others. So now we're going to explore where you land on an outing like Superman Braniac Attacks. Brainiac Attacks is said to have been produced as a marketing tie-in for Superman Returns, Brandon Routh's Superman film released that same year, 2006. Now this is not an uncommon synergistic practice. James Gunn's 2025 Superman film will be accompanied by a summer of Superman in the comics. So hyping up a character who's having a moment is fairly common, and trying to do it across the various mediums is a solid strategy. What's interesting about Brainiac Attacks is some of the stylistic choices that are made and the tonal choices and how that impacts how it can be received. Also, just in general, the end result is a bit uneven. However, it also has one of the most compelling examinations of Superman's secret identity struggle as it pertains to Lois, and also some very drawn out and tiring fights. But there are some highs in Brainiac Attacks, as well as a unique presentation of the Phantom Zone. It's a film worth talking about, and when it tends to be discussed, a lot of times that's around whether it's canon or not, and it's understandable why that is when you see some of the choices made animation-wise. There are some interesting videos about that over at Watchtower Database. However, let's examine it from another angle. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and yes, this is partially happening because I wanted to talk about reckless Lois Lane in this film, who's very much leading into being Silver Age Lois Lane. She takes some risks.
Ms. Lane, you really need to be more careful.
You always catch me when I fall, Superman. Besides, how else am I supposed to get to know you better?
Brainiac Attacks is comprised of two main plot elements. The first one is, as one can imagine, Brainiac attacking. The other is Clark struggling with how he can continue to maintain a dual identity around Lois Lane when he's in love with her and she only seems to care about Superman.
I won't deny there's something about a flying man in tights that gets me tingly.
The movie is deliberately animated in the DCAU style. Superman the Animated Series had run from 1996 to 2000, but the Justice League series, which spun off into Justice League Unlimited, would end in 2006. So at the time, the DCAU look and style would have been quite familiar to viewers, and because of the position that series occupies in certain fan circles, it's still fairly recognizable. So it is likely that at the time, people going into this film would have a knowledge of the DCA universe, and that's something you could still expect some to go into the film with, especially as mentioned because of the animation style, and also the fact that some of the voice cast is the same as from the DCAU. You have the same Superman returning from the animated series, and also the same Lois. However, writer Dwayne Capizzi, who had written Batman vs. Dracula, which is a very underrated The Batman outing, and was one of the writers/producers on The Batman, gave a statement in 2006, and it's one that's good to bear in mind when approaching this movie. He stated, "The movie is not intended to be in continuity with the Timverse, despite utilizing those characters and background designs. Similarly, the depiction of Lex Luthor was intentionally modeled after Gene Hackman's performance in the Donner films, to dovetail with Luthor's depiction in the upcoming Bryan Singer film. If a die-hard fan goes into Brainiac Attacks with this in mind, it should be a smoother ride, and hopefully an entertaining one." Approaching this movie as its own thing does indeed up the enjoyment factor, but it is fascinating that even at the time going into it, this statement is there because it does highlight the knowledge that there would be some who would have a difficult time embracing this kind of presentation. Now, the movie opens up right away onto one of these changes, and that's Lex, a more wacky, jokey Lex.
I spent 2 years and $3 billion mining outer space, and this green grain of rice is all I have to show for it?
A version of Lex that in a way is modeled a bit more off of the Silver Age depictions, because that's partially what's inspiring the Donner Lex, alongside the early Bronze Age depictions. A Lex who was hatching more outlandish schemes, and can be a bit more over the top at times. However, that version of Lex had long been left by the wayside. Post-Crisis in 1985, Lex was moved away from being a zany mad scientist type towards being a more ruthless businessman type in John Byrne's The Man of Steel, and that just continued. And while the scientist elements were reintroduced, they came in a secondary way, and the more cold, calculating personality they had developed became the dominant, and the emotional outbursts, they were more seen as outliers or signs that he was losing control. And as time has gone on, that has become more and more the version that many are familiar with, and so it makes this depiction seem all the more off-putting for some, not for all. Another thing to factor in here is the change of voice actors, going from Clancy Brown to Powers Booth, who some may know voice Gorilla Grodd. Powers Booth does a good job, and does give a lot of intonation and life to this version of Lex, but just depending upon one's familiarity with DCAU and with Brown's Lex work, and also in other versions, not just the DCAU, it can be a little bit jarring. Director Kurt Getta, who had done a lot of DCAU work, including directing Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker, which in my opinion is one of the top DCAU films, but that's a discussion for another time, and your mileage may vary. Now, when discussing the tone of this project, he stated, "The Superman series has been my first experience as a director more than 10 years ago, and this superhero has always held a soft spot in my heart. Warner Home Video desired the classic style of the series for the fans, but they also wanted humor and a certain lightness in its tone as per the first 2 feature movies. And as mentioned, because this is a marketing tie-in, some of the depiction is trying to match a little teensy bit with Superman Returns, at least in the Lex department. And that's not the only change. Mercy is in this film, but the dynamic is also different. Tara Strong is voicing Mercy in this, and this version of Mercy not only has lighter blonde hair, but is more subservient to Lex. She's not quite the level of ditzy assistant from the 80s Superman series, and it's not quite Eve Tessmacher, but she's definitely more demure and less sassy.
Well, I think you're amazing, Mr. Luthor.
I pay you to think I'm amazing, Mercy.
Now launching into the plot, Lex has a satellite, the Lex 9000. He's hoping that this can stop threats before Superman does, so that he can get some of those accolades. He's very jealous of Superman. However, it instantly does not work as Brainiac avoids it and comes to Earth and, well, attacks.
Data. Billions of bit streams. I think I shall help myself.
Another voice change here is that Corey Burton is not voicing Brainiac, and so instead of getting a more robotic sounding Brainiac, you get one that's a bit darker and a bit more evil sounding, menacing in a different way. This version is voiced by Lance Henriksen. And the case of this film for the Brainiac that they're presenting, it works fairly well because they're going for more of an unstoppable, just constantly coming after Clark, almost Terminator-esque kind of Brainiac. Even though that occurs later. At the start, it's very much just a generic, he came for knowledge. And they do mention that Brainiac has been there before. Now, despite there being near constant world-ending threats in this film, and Superman actually getting fairly beaten up, there's very little urgency in any of it. Now, during this fight, Lois and Jimmy get involved in the action, and Lois is as spunky as ever. The film is really trying to drive home the idea that she's reckless. Lois Lane in this has a near Silver Age depiction in how she throws herself into danger. It's less like the DCAU, where she's just determinedly doing her job and that puts her in the line of fire. Here she has a brash, foolhardy nature, and when Superman is around, it's almost exacerbated because she wants to get a sight of him.
Why do you always have to put yourself in these situations?
He's why, Jimmy.
But it is something that she always does. That'll be important for later on. She is very into Superman, though. She's very thirsty throughout this entire movie, the parts where she's not dying. Now, one thing about having Lois be this way that works in the movie's favor is that it adds some nuance to Clark's classic concern that's been around for many, many decades, which is that he can't reveal who he is or his loved ones will be hurt, at least when his secret identity is in play. But as for the star of this film, right from the get-go, it has some decisions that may irk some. During the fights, there's a lot of moments where the frames are held on shots a bit longer than some may expect. Sometimes it's without motion during a talking sequence, other times it's just a part of a battle that seems like it's going on a bit longer than one might expect. And also it seems at times that there's not as much voice foley as there could be. So some moments feel silent when it seems like characters should be grunting or yelling or making some kind of noise. As a result, it leads to the fights feeling a bit drawn out. Couple that with the different depictions, and one can see how some may have dipped out early.
I am so happy. No, wait. I'm sad.
Although mileage varies, some love this version of Lex. Now this fight, it is intercut slightly with some of the Daily Planet stuff, but not too much. And at the end of it, Superman attempts to kill Brainiac. It's all cold and feels very disconnected. And in a way, disproportionate, because there's been nothing established, at least in terms of this film, to show that Brainiac warrants it as of yet. There are many moments in this film that feel like they're lacking some kind of emotional connection, while alternatively, others can feel like padding. The strongest interactions are between the main characters.
Please, shoot my good side.
Didn't know you had one.
Which is a good thing. Now the main villain plot as it unfolds falls back into a classic, which is a Lex and Brainiac team-up. It's a concept that dates back to the Silver Age. The first Brainiac and Lex team-up is Superman 167 from the year 1964, in the story of the team of Luthor and Brainiac. Luthor, I should have the right to kill Superman. I made him tiny with my shrinking ray. No, Brainiac, I should have the honor. I took away his superpowers with this serum. So this team-up is tried and true. It's happened many times in comics and in adaptation. It even happened in the DCAU. There's a particularly horrifying transformation sequence that some may remember. Now in Brainiac Attacks, Lex, after seeing how well he did hijacking his satellite, decides that maybe he can use this to his advantage. They can team up and both maybe get some of what they want. Brainiac had connected with the satellite, he was pelting Superman with beams, it was very Batman Beyond Return of the Joker.
Put on a big show playing hero, chase you from Earth. Then you take over some other world far away and leave the domination of this one to me.
Both are, of course, planning to double-cross the other. While this is going on, Clark is having a crisis about his secret identity and about keeping it from Lois, but they add an extra layer to it. Instead of framing it as just concern for Lois and her safety, he's also concerned for himself in terms of will she be angry and will she ever trust him again because he's kept this a secret.
I'm concerned she won't ever trust me or Superman again.
He's not certain as to what her reaction will be, and it plays it more seriously about him having a secret identity, that there are pros and cons.
I can't knowingly put anyone I care about in that kind of danger.
It adds a little bit of complexity to it. And in these moments, the film really shines. Clark has decided that he's going to tell her, but first he needs to work up the nerve and also get her to notice him. This movie really sells how invisible he is to Lois and how much that hurts. He's just not even there. He's not a factor. This element is oftentimes more pushed into the background or can be the thing that's played for laughs. But this film dials it up in a way the animated series didn't and few others do. Because this has so much build up and focus and is treated the most seriously, it has the most tension of the whole movie. Far more than Brainiac rebuilding himself, which is more abstract, although there are some nice moments that are almost odes to 2001: A Space Odyssey and how slowly and things are happening in space. Now, Clark and Lois end up having to go on an assignment together when the food critic gets sick. She's the one who likes Jimmy. There's a whole side plot that ultimately could have been cut. It's very much a Jimmy doesn't want this unattractive girl hitting on him. She's unattractive because she has glasses, and the hitting on includes things like her trying to say hi to him. And yet when Jimmy finally notices her at the end of the film over Mercy, it's played as a happy moment. Even though it acknowledges that he's settling, it's good to settle because Mercy's too dangerous. If Jimmy really didn't like her, he should have maintained that energy. That whole subplot was very sad if you thought about it for 2 seconds from the food critic's point of view. I hope neither her nor Mercy find the collection of photos Jimmy had taken of Mercy's butt. Now at this dinner, Clark is really trying to work up the nerve to tell Lois. And you really get to see that this is a him thing. He's partially feeling overshadowed by his own alter ego.
What's your story, Ken? Seeing anyone?
I'm waiting for a special someone to take notice of me.
It hurts. The line reads in these moments are really solid. And we also are given a glimpse of the idea that Lois could come to like Clark, that she just hasn't really thought about it. She's so caught up in the fantasy of Superman.
I mean, you're kind, intelligent, good-looking, well-built.
And that really comes through in that even here with her admiring Clark, she's still doing it through the lens of Superman. Now, at this point, Brainiac attacks. He'd been given a sample of Superman's DNA that had been left on him during the previous fight by Lex, and so he's been able to track him.
Son of Krypton.
I'm here, Brainiac.
And here we get another lengthy battle. This one culminates in Lois being critically injured. When she's hit by a beam Brainiac is firing that causes her blood to start to fuse with metal. She was trying to get photos because she was too impatient to wait for Jimmy to get there. And she figured some low-grade cell phone quality photos would do the trick. Potato quality for the front page. However, she tried to get way too close to do so.
Lois. Lois.
Superman, I should be more careful.
As mentioned, this relationship, because they spent so much time treating it with care, has the most tension. And as a result, Superman's quest to save Lois is the most interesting part of this movie. There's so much character work. The level to which Superman is willing to go to save her is bordering on obsessive. He's willing to abandon being Clark Kent. He even throws his glasses in the trash. He sacrifices the entire Fortress of Solitude by going there to look for a cure, knowing Brainiac is following him, so potentially sacrificing the last remaining Kryptonian knowledge. All for Lois, so at this point he feels he can't have a Superman or Clark. It's actually fairly intense.
I need to save Lois. Nothing else matters.
The battle he has at the fortress with Brainiac is one of the best of the film, because it moves quickly, it has imminent stakes on multiple levels, and there's just this palpable urgency. Superman flees to the Phantom Zone to get a cure for Lois, and not being able to sense him, Brainiac assumes that he's dead, and so moves on to attack Metropolis and betray Lex. Lois is dying, and Clark is not there. He said that he was going off to be a foreign correspondent, and Superman is also missing, and so Perry and Jimmy, it looks like they're gonna put it together, but then they just play it off as another joke.
Kent only took the foreign assignment to get away from here, from the pain of seeing Lane this way.
She must really mean a lot to him.
I know that in no way sounded like the end to a jokey scenario, but it's set up like one in the full context. I can only play so much before YouTube hurts me. Superman fights his way through the Phantom Zone. He gets the cure and goes back to triumphantly save Lois. And not just that, but he finally gets to reveal his identity.
Clark?
Yes. Yes, Lois.
Now, throughout this film, there's been a lot of rapid intercutting. Some of them are more awkward than others, but in this sequence of the film, the cutting to different scenes with different emotional tonalities works in its favor, because this saving, it's a fake out.
Something's not right.
Everything is right. Don't you see? I'm here, Clark, with you. Just like you wanted.
The Phantom Zone is inhabited by literal phantoms, and they're trying to tempt Clark to stay by showing him what he wants. A world where Lois wants him more than Superman.
I'm willing to live without Superman, as long as I have you. The man behind the glasses.
Where she would even ask him to give up being Superman, saying that there are other people who could save the world, which also brings up some questions about how he's feeling about being Superman. This movie does so much interesting psychological work with Clark in terms of his struggle with this dual identity and forming intimate relationships. His knowledge, or his presumed knowledge, of the fact that Lois doesn't want him as he is, and that he doesn't believe that she could, and that's what allows him to break free.
Wait! Clark, don't leave me.
You're not Lois.
That's painful, to flee to the arms of someone he doesn't even believe would treat him that way. But while he's gone, it's Lex time. Now, at times it's almost possible to forget that Lex is in this film because he's much more the comic relief. So you have the menacing Brainiac, and then you have these moments with Lex, and it's easy to kind of put him in the back of one's mind. He was going to defeat Brainiac in battle triumphantly, only Brainiac disabled the parts of his suit that allow him to do that, and so now he actually has to fight him seriously. As a new Man of Steel, he got a whole metal outfit going and everything, but now he can't. Now in these scenes, the humorous Lex, who's thrilled to see Superman, it lands.
Look! Up in the sky! It's Superman!
The contrast here feels more in place because there's more beats here between the heavier moments, and because it's a bit of an emotional and character payoff for Lex's arc. He's getting his comeuppance kind of thing. What works less well is the sense of urgency one is meant to have when it comes to Superman rushing to save Lois, because he's now actually come out of the Phantom Zone and he has the cure. And he spent way more time in the Phantom Zone than he thought he did. So there should be some kind of pressing panic, a need to really get out of there and hurry up and get this fight over with, and that could translate into frustration or anger or just some kind of energy. And it really should, because we've seen that he was willing to do anything, blow up his entire life to save Lois. And yet, not only is Superman animated for the most part fairly placidly in terms of facial expressions and again those vocal follies, but this fight goes on so long that the urgency kind of fades. It's just hard to maintain when it keeps going and going. This fight is roughly 15 minutes, and also aside from cuts to Lois, it's cuts to the Jimmy subplot, where he fights Mercy, who he had that crush on, and it goes nowhere. He's trying to get pictures, they get destroyed. Now, Superman does destroy the first exoskeleton, and then he leaves to get to Lois, but Brainiac's still coming, again, like the Terminator. And Brainiac actually smashes the cure.
So bad is what provides the son of Krypton with newfound power.
No!
Oh, come on, that felt a little flat for how desperate Clark is meant to have been. Can we get a... Well, that's more like it. Now, once more, Superman kills Brainiac, but for real this time, probably. More earned, I guess. It should still have a lot more weight than it does. Superman goes back to the dying Lois, and he's able to save her through Disney princess logic. It was established earlier that he had absorbed some of the energy from the Phantom Zone, so it does make sense within the film's own logic that he can do this, but as he's kissing her, he cries, some tears, and then they cure her. And a mirror to the dream sequence, she does recognize him.
Clark?
No.
But instead of telling her, he gives in to his fears and maintains the status quo. It's not treated as him not wanting her to know that he's Clark. It's treated more like he's resigning himself, the fact that this is the way that things need to be. It's really sad. He does still blame himself for her getting hurt, and because it happened while he was Clark, he's now convinced that she's just not safe around any version of him, and so he plans to quit the Daily Planet. It's not until he sees her run off from the hospital to chase her next door, and literally run off, in her heels. That's because there's been a Mixie sighting. You gotta run for that. But only then does he realize, after working with her for probably at least a few years, it seems like it's been a while, that she'll just chase any story. It's not entirely about him. Not everything's about you, Clark.
Lane sure lives dangerously.
Yes. Yes, she does.
and that maybe by him being there to make sure she doesn't get too hurt, it's a good thing. And so he's not quitting after all. Also, we did see before she ran off that Lois has started to think more about Clark, actually missing him, whereas before she didn't really notice when he was there or not. And as for Lex, everybody found out that he was shady. The end. Brainiac Attacks in many ways is more interesting to examine and analyze than it is to just sit and watch. It's fundamentally fairly uneven. The action sequences, which is where a lot of the movie is devoted, they do drag and move from dramatic slugfests to more tedious as a result. The base concept is solid. Luthor and Brainiac teaming up to take down Superman. It's an entertaining premise and a play on a classic concept. And this more humorous Lex gives it a bit of a different dynamic. However, it just doesn't have enough meat to fill the runtime. This feels like it would have been a very solid two-parter, but stretching it out to meet that over an hour runtime, which it only does by a little bit, it's an hour 16. You also have to factor in things like the credits, so it's a bit less. This movie has a decent amount of padding. There are entire sequences as mentioned that could have been cut. Filler plots are fun if they're entertaining and or feel like they have some meaning. Anything that had to happen involving Jimmy could have happened with him off screen or with just the few sequences of him talking to the characters directly. But all of his extra plot didn't really need to be there. It didn't add anything. The sound mixing for this film is also not the greatest. There are a lot of times when ambient noises or vocalizations are lacking, or the mix is just higher on the music than on the sound effects. And sometimes that can lead to some scenes feeling a bit hollow or less effective. Sound mixing is one of those things where you rarely notice it unless there's something off about it. It's the same with editing. Lots of the post-production positions are like that. And I'm not saying I'm perfect by any means. I often sound like I'm coming at you live from a tin can, but it's something I noticed while watching. However, there are also parts of this film that really work. If one can get into humorous Lex and can get past the voice change with the DCAU style, there are moments in this film that are fairly funny. Now, when it comes to the action, however, Brainiac's motivations are very basic, and they come across as less engaging than what is going on in Clark's personal life, which is, as mentioned, the highlight of the film. The most passion, emotion, drama, the best twist, the most salient action, all revolve around it. In a way, it's refreshing to see a part of Superman lore that is often was taken in a more humorous fashion, treated so seriously in terms of the secret identity. It's an interesting flip in a film that wanted to have so many lighthearted moments. And it's not to say that it's devoid of humor. It's there, but it's also treating it in a more adult fashion. For the most part, not entirely. Now, while you can watch this entire movie online fairly simply, even on YouTube, time of recording, Brainiac Attacks falls down the memory hole a decent amount. It's a direct-to-DVD feature pre-streaming. It looks like a tie into the DCAU, but it isn't. It doesn't have many memeable moments like some other animated films.
Who's your daddy?
And it's paced in such a way that it has lots of moments where one could conceivably check out. Sometimes it'll resurface in a video here and there. Sometimes the official DC account will post clips from it. On the whole, in terms of animated films that are out there, it's okay. It does make some bold choices, and not all of them work, but they are interesting. And there are some who have a very strong fondness for it. Some have nostalgia and some just really like it. So all of these are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. Where do you fall on this? Are you a fan of the movie? Had you seen it? Do you agree with some of my thoughts? Do you disagree entirely? The action was the best part. The relationship was a snooze fest. Your thoughts, I want to hear them. Please leave them down below. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Thanks so much for taking some time today to spend discussing comics and comic adjacent things with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.